So when entering data in Excel, we usually press the enter key after entering the data. So if I, for example, just enter some random numbers over here, and I press enter, you can see basically after pressing enter goes down to the cell below it, right? However, if you want to actually go to the next cell on the right, you can use the tab key. So if I type in some number and I press tab, it will basically move to the cell to the right of it. So that's just a way if you ever want to enter data across a number of columns. And what's interesting is if I now press the enter at this stage, it'll move back to the first one. So you can then press tab again, tab again, tab. And if I press enter again, it'll move again back to the first column that I started in. So that's if you basically want to enter sort of a table kind of format. It's just a nice thing to know. Now, one of the things you'll notice is when you enter any number, it's immediately aligned to the right of the cell. Now, for example, if I go to the alignment over here, in the menu, I could actually left align these numbers, but the default, if you don't put any alignment, is to the right of the cell. Similarly, if you enter in any date, so if I enter in, for example, the 15th of March, 2021, and let me just expand this so it becomes quite obvious, the width of it, increasing the width, you can see that the date also is right aligned. So anything that you typically can do a calculation on will get aligned to the right. If I type in some text, let's say the word hello, you can see that in itself, any text gets aligned to the left. So just be aware that numbers and dates get aligned to the right by default of a cell, whereas text would get aligned to the left. Now, sometimes you want to enter a number and have it actually stored as text instead of being stored as a number. So, it typically would be in the case of, for example, like a telephone number. A telephone number isn't something that you would normally do a calculation on. So if I had to type in, let's say the telephone number started with 011, and let's say it was 555 6666, right? Just for argument's sake. Now watch what happens if I hit enter. If I hit enter, the first thing you'll see, it goes to the right and it actually loses the 0, which can be quite a problem, especially some numbers may have 2 zeros in the front, like an international dialing code or something like that. So in order to enter a number, but entering numbers, but if you want it to be definitely stored as text, you use basically your apostrophe as the first character. Now if I type in 011, 555 6666 and I hit enter, you can see it's actually left aligned and it's kept the 0. And you can even see that it's got this little warning over here. If I clicked on that, it says number is stored as text. It's actually warning us that this number is actually in fact not stored as a number, but it's being stored as text, which in this case is what we want, so it's perfectly fine. So you can also see that this number is now left aligned, and let's just actually make this column even bigger. So remember to resize a column, I just go in between, for example, C and D, and when it turns into this double arrow, I just click and drag, and that will basically expand the column. So now you can clearly see that the number itself, this one that's actually a number, is going to be aligned to the right, and this one will remove any zeros that you enter in the front because it doesn't serve any purpose when entering it in as a number. But if you store it as a text, it will obviously keep those zeros that you've entered in on the front. Now, one of the things you should also note is that let's assume if a column is actually too small, right? So let's say I just drag this column and I make it too small to fit the number. You can see any numbers will basically show these hashtag characters. Now, when I click on it, it shows the hashtag characters here. If you go into the formula bar here, you can actually see that there is a date stored in here. So though it's showing this hashtag, there's a date, and this hashtag characters basically mean that this column is effectively too small, and we see the same issue here for the number. Notice, however, that anything that's added as text will basically spill over into the next cell. So you won't see these hashtags for any text. So if I had to type in a long thing like hello there world, you'll see it just goes into, even though this thing is entered in cell C12, right? So in cell C12, you can see part of it is going into cell D12. Now, this can be an issue with text. Just to show you, if I typed in something else here, if I typed in the word hi in D12, right, it then actually cuts off that. Now, it's still stored in that cell, as you can see on the top, hello there world, but it's just going to cut off because there's something here that needs to be shown instead. If there was nothing in the cell, if I delete it, for example, then it will actually show the whole text. So that's just something to be aware of with regards to the way text is handled when it goes over the size of the cell. Now, one of the things you can do is you can resize a column automatically so that it'll actually fit all of the items within that column will fit. And the way to do that is if I go between the C and the D here, and it turns into that crosshair, right? I just double click at this point and it'll automatically resize column C so that all of the items will fit. So if this was the longest item over here, it will cater for that longest item. You can see, remember, this wasn't showing, this number here wasn't showing, but this was the longest item. So it actually made the column width big enough so that the largest item, which was this hello there world, would basically fit in. Obviously, this meant that these ones will no longer show the hashtags because there's enough space now. Using another example of the Autofit, let's just go to this other worksheet. And let's assume that we had, for example, if you've got like this employee data, or let's actually go to this, yeah, let's say this particular sheet, right? Now, if you have a lot of cells that are basically too small, so let's say, for example, that one's too small, I'm just actually resizing them by clicking and dragging to make them too small. You can see that now this doesn't fit in because, you know, there's a cell next door. So the whole of the word of Gauteng, which was here, won't show. And similarly, you know, years of employment. Now, don't worry about these formulas right now. This is just an example sheet. We're just using it to demonstrate. So if you don't understand what these formulas mean at this point in time, it's not an issue. It is covered in later on in another course. So what I just wanted to show you though is, like, let's assume now we made all of these things too small. So we've got a number of different columns where, you know, it's not actually fitting in. Now, instead of obviously having to go, I'm just resizing all of them. So instead of having to go to each one and saying double click there to expand that one, and then doing the same over here, what you can do is you can actually highlight the whole sheet. So by going to this little block above the row 1 and next to the A, and you're clicking on that, that highlights, remember, selects the whole sheet. And then you go between any two of the columns. It doesn't matter whether it's between B or C, C or D, between any two columns where it turns into that double arrow. You just double click and then everything will be resized. So what it will do is Excel will then resize each column based on the largest you know, text that it needs to, or number that it needs to fall into that column. So everything will basically get resized correctly. So that covers, you know, when you have to do a whole sheet. I also want to go back to this initial sheet that we were working on and show you that, you know, this also applies with regards to rows, right? So let's assume I just highlight this whole sheet and I increase the font size, right, to 24, right? Now, the moment I increase the font size, actually make it even bigger. The moment I increase this font size, you can see that it automatically resized the rows, right? But if I wanted to manually, just for the purpose of this example, I'm going to select the whole sheet and I'm going to manually make these rows too small. So I'm going to click now, and as I'm adjusting this row, because remember all the rows are selected, it's basically going to adjust all the rows. So you can see what happens. This information is there, but it can't show the whole thing. It's saying 242, but you can't see the whole 242 because the row is actually too small. You may come across this sometimes. If you actually see this way, it's like cutting off. It means that the rows are too small. And you can also basically, if I go in between any two rows, like here, where it turns into the double arrow, if I double click, it will resize that row so that the number would fit in. So the same way that we can auto fit a column, the same principle applies for rows. And we can also, in this particular case, highlight the whole sheet, go to that particular area and double click. Well, let's do it again. Highlight the whole sheet, go in between any two rows and double click, and it will resize them all so that everything fits correctly. So that just covers the auto fitting of the rows.